Now, you both have the same goal, really, which is to light up parts of Africa that don't have access to power, and there are many swathes of the continent that still remain in darkness. So you are both doing your bit to power up Africa, but doing it slightly differently. You are focusing on rural areas and sort of small-scale industries, mainly residential homes. You said it very well, you're focusing on the forgotten middle, on industries and commercial entities. And the form you're doing is different. Peter, you're using biogas, right? Can you explain to us very briefly how that works and what you're doing?
Awesome. Thank you very much. So we basically get agricultural waste that no one needs, and that's usually burnt. So rice husks, maize cobs, granite shells, coffee husks, we convert that into methane and hydrogen, which then goes into an engine and runs it, and that generates electricity. And that, in a village of maybe 1,000 homes, that can deliver between 0.5 megawatt to 2 megawatts of electricity, which covers all the needs of such a village. And if such a village is, for example, miles and miles away from the grid, it becomes significantly cheaper to develop that mini-grid to industrial scale than to connect that village to the grid. So that's what we do. We deliver electricity that's affordable, grid quality at the same price as the grid. And we do that in Uganda at the moment.
In Uganda at the moment, right. Norman, tell me about you. You mainly focus on solar energy, is that right?
Yes, Malik. It's basically, we like to call it distributed energy or decentralized energy, targeting really, as you put it rightly, the forgotten middle. And I call it the forgotten middle because there's a lot of heat at the IPP level, which is at utility stage, and not necessarily a lot of light at the moment, but there's a lot of heat. Then there is work that he does more in the rural part. But what drives the economies of Africa is the commercial and industrial players, the data centers, the big businesses, whether it's your commercial, whether it's your industries, the mines, the private schools. That, unfortunately, has started to suffer significantly in the continent because there is no more energy security. The grid is weak, wobbly, and struggling. And so most of these players are beginning to fire up the generator, and probably it's the most expensive way to try to run your business using a generator. And yet, they've got a massive real estate on top of their roof. Some have got a massive car park, which is idle and dumb. And our view of the world is, let me show up, let me put panels on top of your roof, let me utilize your car park. If you've got a mine, you've got a massive real estate, then you've got this massive reactor in the sun, called the sun in Africa, and we can generate anything up to 10 megawatt, 20 megawatt, and we can power the actual company. You can also put storage solutions now, whether it's Tesla, even Tesla is available, whether it's you put a wind farm or a mini hydro or wind, but you can literally allow every entity in Africa today to generate its own power and possibly even sell some of it to the grid. So it's a different mindset.
And how does the costing compare to that from the grid?
As you know, to date, solar is probably the cheapest source of energy, much cheaper than the grid. If I was to throw in numbers, solar per kilowatt hour can range anything around 7 cents right now if you're building a decent enough plant size. Your typical grid in Africa, the correct pricing should be in the 13 to 15 US cents, correct price. I say so because there's a lot of subsidy, which has also created problems. Your typical generator is anywhere in the 24 US cents per kilowatt hour.
Much more expensive,
so
of course.
Solar has to be our default go-to technology to resolve the energy crisis in Africa.
Peter, you also work on Minigrid. So you have sort of two businesses. One is the biogas part, but you also have co-founded Modularity Grid. Tell us a little bit about the work you do there. So you are basically providing the technology to make mini-grids more efficient.
Indeed, indeed. We were actually quite grateful for the work of the UK government in places like Africa through Innovate UK. So Mandulis and Modularity Grid, working together with Imperial College, actually did the industrial research and development of the digital mini-grid systems that we're now scaling up. And what happens there is you have a portfolio of mini-grids, and by working on the digital technologies that connect them all together, you're able to work with tens of thousands of sources of biomass feedstock to feed those mini-grids in terms of waste to energy, but also manage the distribution of that electricity to the households in a particular mini-grid. And working on it, linking both the hardware and the software parts together makes it very, very interesting and a lot more modern than what you would expect to find anywhere in the world.
When we were chatting yesterday, you came up with a very interesting analogy about the aeroplane and how that's almost the same thing as a mini African village. I'd love you to tell our audience what you mean by that.
Awesome, because think about this. I flew here on an Airbus A380. My background is aerospace engineering. And you find easily, a few hundred seats. Each seat's got phone charging, it's got a television screen, and that's the same amount of electricity that you'll probably have used by a rural village home. So when you have a village of about 500 homes and a mini-grid that connects them up together, that's the same amount of electricity that you probably have being used in an Airbus A380 or A350 or something like that. So it kind of brings it home for me personally.
Yes.
It means if it can work in a rural village, if the technology we develop in rural villages with regards to remote monitoring of battery systems and having 24-hour-a-day electricity at the lowest cost, that technology can actually be brought back to Europe and to the UK and used out here to bring down the cost of energy as well.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting analogy. Norman, so who are your clients? Who are these people who are saying, yes, come and put the solar panels on my roof?
I think as a start, we had to be pragmatic. My background and our background as a group, we're part of the Econet group, or today called Cassava Technologies. So we come from the telecom space. 20 years ago, we had this crisis where you had a monopoly called a fixed line operator trying to find their way to make telecommunication available. It took 20 years to figure it out eventually, but we ended up recreating and rewriting the African continent in terms of telecoms and penetration of telecoms. But we learned something from there, and one of the key things we learned is you need to focus on what we call the buffaloes versus the rabbits. The buffaloes that really can feed in Africa when you want to feed a family and you're hunting, and there's a limping buffalo and there's a rabbit. You don't spend energy chasing the rabbit, you bring the buffalo first. Then you can start chasing rabbit thereafter. Yeah. So we were very deliberate and says there is the top 500 corporates in Africa. That's our sweet spot. If I mention the name, you know them. Whether it's Unilever, Coca-Cola, whether it's private schools, whether it's clinics.
The big guys.
The big guys. The second piece is the data centers and the telecom switching centers. Then you have got telecom towers in Africa. Those are probably the key customers who can sign a 10 to 20-year commitment that they will buy power from us. It's a power lease agreement or a power purchase agreement. And they're investment grade. And those are the ones that we are starting with. I think eventually we will converge with what he's working on and what the grid is trying to do. And eventually we would have solved this crisis in Africa.
There's a great question that's come in from the audience, and this one is for you, Norman, in particular. Solar panels can't replace the grid, though, right? Especially when there are clouds, rain, and in the evenings, right? So can you elaborate on the storage solutions, and how much does that add to the cost of solar power?
So I think I'll throw the figures out there. Storage is a very interesting conversation, albeit very futuristic. It's changing, particularly the lithium battery technology. The price is coming down a little bit slower than we prefer because the demand is high. Not only do we need storage lithium battery to power homes and businesses, we are also using it to power electric vehicles right now. So the demand is high. But if you start to see the crisis in energy right now, the increase in price of diesel, and every corporate in Africa having to fire up a generator, the conversation is becoming realistic that I can combine my solar to my battery and I can actually deploy a solution. In one of our markets, we rolled out 500 Tesla Powerwalls in a very rural parts of Africa, but mostly to power telecom towers. And I could report today that I think after 2.5 years, we've had zero theft of those power walls.
Really?
Don't tell anyone about it, of course. You might excite them.
It's just a secret.
It's a secret,
Just amongst
yes.
us.
Yeah, but I think the technology is coming of age. The pricing is getting there. Unfortunately, for storage, the price is increasing. We're now beginning to look at biomass as an alternative way to also start to complement.
Yeah.
But we have to look at technologies that are of what we call tier 1 technologies. That's what you need if you're going to sign a 15-year lease.
Well, you have the right person to talk to, of course.
Yeah.
Peter, storage, that's a really good point, you know.
Indeed.
And, I mean, mini grids have their own challenges as well. I'm curious, you know, how hard is it to really understand how much energy is required by a household, by an individual household in a village? How do you gauge that? And what do you do with the surplus energy that's created? How
Awesome.
do you store that?
Thank you very much. So our mini grids work with biomass covering the base load and solar coming in to cover the peaks at daytime. And our average mini grid size is, as I said, you know, at least 0.5 megawatt and up to 2 megawatts in Uganda. That's the range you're allowed to build a mini grid to. What that means is the households, about 1,000 of them or so in a mini grid, will not use much electricity by day because most people are in the fields harvesting you know, and planting and so on. But you have all the mills running by day. And so our main storage is actually dry storage of the actual biomass waste itself. And what happens is most of the electricity is used for agriculture value addition because the big corporates out there, you know, in terms of breweries, in terms of, you know, other food industries, global ones, have their supply chains in these villages. And they need those products, you know, pre-processed to the right quality standards, dry, clean, etc. And so the electricity that we generate and that we deliver at that low cost enables industries to set up branches in these rural areas, enabling these communities to actually feed into the global marketplace. And that allows us to run, you know, around the clock with all the electricity actually being used around the clock, even though the communities will only use the electricity in their homes in the evenings when they get back home. We can still keep everything running around the clock. Electric vehicles have come in handy, obviously, because, you know, the price of diesel and petrol has shot up in most of these areas. So we do have EVs moving around, you know, moving farmers' crops from A to B, electric ambulances and so on and so forth, and some battery storage as a buffer. Because when you have, you know, your buffer where you've got your biomass and your solar going into that buffer, you can guarantee a uniform quality of electricity around the clock. That buffer may only be, you know, 1 hour of a buffer, but it delivers better quality than the grid. So we've even had now, you know, shopping malls moving from the nearby towns to the rural areas so that they can keep their fridges on 24 hours a day. So it is quite exciting from that point of view, and it's leading us now to, you know, from our current 3 locations to developing 26 now across Uganda, and we're launching the first 10 that have been funded this year, next year, and fundraising for the next 16.
I want to talk to you quickly about payments.
Yep.
You know, there seems to be a lot of innovation in the startup space with people coming up with innovative solutions to power up Africa, such as yourself. But the bottleneck seems to be in payments. How do you get your customers, in which in many cases are, you know, rural farmers, people who work in the fields, what's your payment model and how do you ensure that, you know, they don't default on their payments?
That's why we go for biomass, because our payment model is linked to the rural farmers actually.
How so?
Being in agriculture. We purchase agricultural waste. They get an income from that. But secondly, when they have access to low-cost electricity, you know, at grid price or below for ag processing, they're able to multiply their income even further because the big firms will buy their grain at triple the price if it's at the right quality standard. So by us linking them to us, that way we know that they will have an income. But then in terms of how they do pay, they pay us, you know, cashless, prepayment systems. We've got prepaid meters in each home, in each business, and they buy the units of kilowatt hours they need to use, and you know, every customer replaces that whenever they do need it. But also, we've also decided to bring in all the mothers in the community as part of that. So we've deployed gasified cook stoves in these homes. Some of the excess electricity that we do produce goes into producing, biomass pellets to replace firewood in their homes. And when they've cooked with our biomass pellets in these gas-fired cook stoves, they are left with a biochar, which we actually sell to the cement industry.
So you're trying to keep it quite circular.
So full circular economy,
yeah.
Making sure as much money as possible from the corporates goes to their suppliers in these rural communities, and then the issues start reducing as we go along.
I know we're almost out of time, but I'm going to push my luck and come to you with one more question. I'm just really curious about solar panels. I want to talk to you about the supply chain disruption that we've seen. Now, I know a lot of the solar panels are imported and they come from mainly China. Hasn't that pushed up the cost of importing solar panels? Has that gone up as a result of supply chain, the supply chains being broken? And is it time for Africa to consider manufacturing solar panels? Is that even an option?
Yeah, I think both the COVID crisis and certainly the Ukraine crisis has seen the price start to skyrocket a bit. But solar prices went down in the past 7 years by almost 85 to 90%. So
wow.
Yeah, we're catching up a little bit, but it's not that significant. Is there an opportunity to start to locally manufacture solar? It's been tried. It's a nice, fancy idea. But solar, you need critical mass. You need the economies of scale to
Correct.
do so. However, there is a huge opportunity to assembly, particularly batteries, storage, because they are by nature very heavy.
Yes.
And they take long to come to the ground. So I think there is an opportunity there. But as for solar panels, I think China continues to be the player, the manufacturer of the world, and will probably be there for a while because they have got what we call the Bloomberg Tier 1 suppliers. And the financiers look at that, the quality of the deployments and the quality of the panels.
You talked about batteries. Great question. The material resource for batteries are in Africa. How do we move forward the conversation about bringing the manufacturing of lithium batteries to Africa to reduce the total cost of ownership?
Yeah, I think the most beautiful part is I said, if I was a millionaire, the one business I would like to put in right now in Africa is in energy. Why? Because everything else works on top of that energy. Everything that we heard from Minister Sina, the digital world in Africa, the telecoms, the fiber, everything in Africa needs a stable power system. I'm based in Johannesburg, and we're suffering from 2-hour, 4-hour load shedding right now in probably one of Africa's biggest economies. You cannot afford even a 10-minute blackout, let alone a 4-hour blackout. So there is a huge opportunity to start to invest in assembling of lithium batteries. And we've seen a few entrepreneurial startups, and they're doing exceptionally well. So I think to the financing world out there, the biggest way to impact the climate in Africa is to start to allow storage. We've got enough sun, so you don't need to worry about that. We also got a lot of land,
right.
but we need storage.